Our psalm for today has the subtitle in the NRSV version of Thanksgiving for Recovery from Illness, or in another version, When the Lord Saves You from Death. It's a word of faith in challenging times. At least that's how I see it in part. I hear these words of blessing spoken from a time after a return from suffering. They are needed words. They're meant to engage us as hearers and speakers of divine justice within our reach, that God will protect and save and show us goodness. But what do we do when the illness isn't something we can return from? What do we do when we are afflicted by illnesses that don't or won't go away? Where is the thanksgiving in those moments? For some, when personal tragedy strikes, it is to the absence of God that we point. Our experience of faith is that it is there with you in the good times, and around every bad turn will always be an upswing. But when the optimism runs out, what then? Do we abandon faith, God, the struggle? And what do we do when the illness isn't an individual illness in the first place? Can there be recovery from racist systems that perpetuate themselves throughout our history? Or on this Earth Day weekend, maybe we also ask, what about ecological devastation or degradation? The earth needs humankind to respond with efforts to change a human consciousness, our conduct, if we are going to have an impact on our global future. But that work sometimes doesn't feel possible any longer. People's conduct must be changed from a place of irresponsible or harmful adaptation of resources to our wants, our human wants, to a responsible, harmonious adaptation of human, individual, and community living into the rhythms of the earth. Today, our planet faces the accelerating loss of plant and animal species at an alarming rate, while rapidly shifting weather patterns and progressive climate change is disrupting human and natural habitats alike. There's a continuing loss of biodiversity that jeopardizes food production. The destruction of natural environments increases the likelihood of human exposure to viruses and pathogens for which we have no cure. And increasingly volatile weather, from extreme rain events, subsequent flooding, to lengthy droughts, places pressure on aging infrastructure, our agricultural and health systems to respond to natural disaster. In verse 3, where the psalmist writes, "The snares of death encompassed me," this sometimes feels like where we are in terms of the climate crisis. We have not yet seen the other side, the light, the hope, enough to see beyond these snares of death. We are trapped by our own systems, and yet it is encompassing. So where might we look for recovery in the midst of Earth's disease? Or if we look into the human diseases that transcend fixing, as the current struggle in the Lower Dauphin School District shows us. Racism, hatred, and bullying are not part of a previous disease of humanity, but our current reality. As parent Delali Mensai Jamison told Penn Live last month, it shouldn't be tolerated. Hatred in our schools. And she's right. There is no way at this stage of national reckoning with racial tensions that any student in our country should be daily harassed into submission to leaving school. Not anywhere, not here. I can understand the many parents who've come forward to point a light on the need to deal with hate speech, feeling crushed by their children's school environment, and even more so why there must be a hefty response from the school district. I had a friend once who reminded me that racism is anesthetizing. The goal of hatred is to numb us against each other, not to unite around ourselves, the unity of community. We are taught to look for our own salvation, not the safety of others. So in this environment, what does recovery look like? When the illness is not simple, recovery is lengthy and complex and never-ending. There is a difference between management of illness and recovery, right? So in our world, and many times even in our own personal health journeys, we dream of recovery, but will more than likely have to be content with management. Not because we aren't good enough to get God's miraculous recovery, or that God doesn't love us enough to fix us, but because life isn't what we will ever expect or predict. When those disciples were walking the road, they were seeking to process grief. And in that space, God enters without pomp and circumstance, without grandiose, blinding light. Just a stranger who walks on the road and is ready to listen. The disciples are too overwhelmed to think beyond their pain and present grief, and they miss the miracle with them. Just as we miss the miracle of the presence of others in our lives every week, maybe even every day. How does one witness to salvation when there is no end in sight? And what is recovery without reconciliation? The psalmist points us to the suffering endured at the hands of others. It is personal, the suffering here. And yet it is still a space of community in which the lament is offered up. The experience of salvation and liberation can become more pronounced when we are aware of the injustices suffered. And God intends that calls for justice be public. Not just to put pressure on the offending party, but so that we can all be present to this divine investment in our lives. Injustice is God's love acted out. As I know you've heard before, as I likely have quoted before, as Dr. Cornell West has said, justice is what love looks like in public. So the psalmist's catalog of suffering is to be seen by others, to be known by others, so that they can move into solution or resolution in the presence of all people. Like services for victims of domestic violence, or litanies for structural change, even the reading of names undergoing health challenges and grieving each week that we do here in the prayers of the people. The public proclamation of suffering makes public our need for God's love by proclaiming our deepest desire for and our trust in God's liberation. And liberation is what we are seeking, begging for this active quest for justice and truth and peace, for expressions of love that will witness to God's liberating work, if we're listening to our earth closely enough, to our partners on this earth. So that even when it seems hopeless, God offers presence and patience on that road to the psalmist. Not because there will be a miracle and the once ill will be revived, nor will the illness of our planet and our structural isms drift away. That may become the hardest time in this quest for recovery. The work when it seems impossible. When the long-range planning team put together our main goal, this creating a culture of experimentation, the hope was to recover some vitality and connection that pandemic and other concerns and just time have paused in this community. That means that we might have to be willing to seek beyond our text the comfort that comes first, and then dig into that which challenges us. On one hand, we can hear this psalm saying, congratulations, you have received the hope that you wanted, the recovery you needed. But we can also look deeper to say, what happens when there isn't that kind of thankfulness? This is what the 3 sub-areas are meant to open us further to. A renewed engagement with marginalized communities, and there are many who are in need of our attention. Clearly, some right here in Hummelstown, whether we are parents in this district or not. Mostly not. A renewed commitment to protecting our planet as a shared space. That transcends this little church, but it is still part of our work. And it takes work on so many levels. And a renewed commitment to sharing this journey with others as we look for sharing leadership and creating new partnerships. It's a hope that by seeking deeper, we can glimpse more of God's redemption and liberation so that we might be agents of redemption and liberation from the forces that hold us, the illnesses that we are all afflicted with. In honor of our psalmist, we must be willing to voice them even when we are made vulnerable by it, whether that truth is racist, whether that truth is consuming our earth's resources, whether that truth is chronically unwell, whether that truth is lonely or painful. God called community together to give voice to suffering, so that we might be co-creators of change. In midst of the challenges, all the ways in which the world seems to be falling apart, I choose to be optimistic still. More people than ever are coming together around unified causes. The voices are there and they are ready to be heard. The health of our planet is known, and we know that it is inextricably connected to our health, to the well-being of us as people. So we must take up the banner and run with those who call for justice. We must listen to the earth's cry for new solutions, to build on science and partnerships and sustained health of nature and people, because you are a partner in this vital cause, because you are a part of recovery. I can't make your choice for you, but certainly now is as important a time as ever to pursue that old adage, think globally, act locally. We all choose our own role to play, and it matters more now than ever before. Our psalmist reminds us that, God, we have come to be your servants. Not just your servants, but born of your servants. As it says, I am your servant, the child of your serving girl. It's generations of servanthood that we come to as Christians. And God has been there to loose the bonds. We are to be helpers. We are born of helpers. And if we have freedom, if we have liberation, and if we can see injustice, we have power because of the God's presence behind the universe, behind and beyond this moment that opens doors to liberation. Just by walking, just by talking, just by eating. In realness, we are allowed to be whole, and that is a job for all of us. There may not be a simple thanksgiving for recovery from an illness, from what afflicts us, but there is still recovery. In addiction communities, I have heard it said that recovery isn't a once-and-done checkoff. It's a system. It's meant to support a constant life flow, an awareness of self and others in a way that the addiction obscured. Our dependence on the consumption of Earth's resources, not relationships with our planet, is an addiction we as a species have been struggling with for millennia. Hatred is an addiction of power that we must see past to develop relationships with the holy invitation of liberation. Because we are called to love God. Because we are called into community, not in spite of who we are and where we are, but because of it. All that we know and all that we have here in this place. And if change is to come, we must grasp for a part of the process of recovery, to find our reconciliation there, not in some future end point where we will know it, but on the way. The way from and to Emmaus, the way to and from Harrisburg, the way to and from Hummelstown, the way to and from this planet Earth that is calling for us to be engaged on the journey. Let us give thanks that we might journey together anew. Amen.